The Galactic Council opened the signal and heard something breathing. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comfortable kind of silence that settles into a room when everyone is thinking. This was the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes your pulse feel loud. I had been standing at the back of the council chamber for exactly 4 minutes when the audio began to play, and every single being in that enormous room stopped moving at once. I am not easily scared. My name is Yale Oren, and I have spent 11 years working as Earth's liaison to the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. I have shaken hands that had no fingers. I have looked into eyes that faced the wrong direction. I have sat through 18-hour translation sessions where the concept being discussed had no word in any human language. I thought I had seen everything this galaxy could place in front of me. I had not expected this. The sound that filled the chamber was soft. It was slow. It rose and fell in a gentle, steady rhythm, barely louder than a whisper. It was the sound of a human child sleeping. And it had traveled across 400 light years to get here. Council Representative Vothelane of the Vreth species was the first to speak, though speaking is not quite the right word for what Vothelane does. The Vreth communicate through pressure waves that are then translated by a device mounted near their speaking membrane. The result is a flat, mechanical voice that carries no emotion, which on this particular morning made what Vothelane said feel even colder. This signal was transmitted from the third planet of the star you call the Sun. It was not encrypted. It was not coded. It was broadcast on an open frequency, unprotected, directed at no specific target. It has reached 14 of our member star systems. We are treating this as a matter of urgent galactic concern. I kept my face very still. I was good at that. The nature of the signal, Vothelane continued, is biological, organic. It appears to be a direct audio recording of a living creature in a state of unconsciousness. No civilized species transmits biological audio into open space. This has never happened in the 4,000-year history of this council. Earth has been a provisional member for 63 years. We expected better. I looked around the chamber. There were representatives from 12 species present. The Solon, who looked something like tall herons with silver skin, stood very still near the far wall. The Merit cluster delegates were floating in their containment spheres, and the light inside those spheres had shifted to a deep, slow blue, which I knew from study meant they were disturbed. The Kalun ambassador, Sayela, was seated at the curved delegate table. She had not moved since the audio began. Her eyes, which were large and pale and calm in the way that only someone who has lived for 6 centuries can manage, were fixed on the speaker panel as if the sound were still playing. It had been 20 seconds since the audio ended. Sayela was still looking at the panel. I raised my hand. Vothelane's translator plate buzzed. The Earth representative will speak when recognized. I am recognized now, I said, and walked to the front of the chamber before anyone told me I wasn't. There is a strategy in diplomatic situations where you let the other party define the problem before you respond. It gives you time, and it gives them the illusion of control. I had used that strategy many times. I was not going to use it today, because the problem being defined in this room was already going in the wrong direction. And if I let it continue for another 3 minutes, Earth was going to be classified as a reckless, dangerous member state, and I was going to spend the next 5 years filing appeals. I would like to ask a question before I respond to the Council's concerns, I said, standing at the speaker's platform. The platform was not designed for human bodies. It was slightly too tall, and the angle of the projection surface made me have to tilt my head back. I didn't let that bother me. When did this signal arrive at your monitoring stations? Vothelane answered without hesitation. The signal was first intercepted by the Merit Relay Station 382 of your years ago. It was flagged for analysis and placed in the long-term study archive. It was fully decoded 41 years ago. It has been under review since then. I nodded slowly. And when was it transmitted from Earth? A pause, a longer one than I expected. The Council's data officer, a quiet Marit who managed the archive, pulled up the file. The transmission origin timestamp, adjusted for your calendar system, indicates it was sent 423 years ago. 423 years ago. I breathed in, I breathed out. 423 years ago, Earth had no galactic council, no diplomatic corps, no concept of provisional membership in an interstellar community. 423 years ago, the most advanced thing we had launched into space was a metal probe the size of a small car, carrying a gold-plated record with greetings in 55 languages and a photograph of a man and a woman standing next to each other looking hopeful. 423 years ago, someone at a radio transmission station had pointed a dish at the night sky and pressed a button, and what came out was not a mathematical sequence, not a proof of intelligence, not a carefully constructed diplomatic greeting designed to communicate that humans were a reasonable and civilized species worth speaking to. It was a man named, and I had read the file 3 times on the transit shuttle, so I had this exactly right, a man named Oliver. Oliver, who worked the overnight shift at a small research station in a cold country and who had, one night, brought his young daughter to work with him because her mother was ill and there was no one else to watch her. She had fallen asleep in his chair. He had covered her with his coat. And then, because the universe was large and the night was quiet, and he was, by all accounts, the kind of person who felt things deeply and needed somewhere to put those feelings, he had held a microphone near her face and recorded her breathing and sent it into space. Not as a message, not as a signal, not as anything except what it was, a father listening to the sound of his daughter sleeping and wanting the dark to hear it too. The council chamber was very quiet. I understand the council's concern, I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced being steady for 11 years and it had never been harder than it was right now. I understand that this is unprecedented. I understand that the galactic community has protocols around biological transmission, and that those protocols exist for good reasons, and that Earth did not follow them. I paused. Earth did not follow them because Earth did not know they existed. And the reason this signal was sent is not what you think it is. I would like permission to explain, not to apologize, just to explain. Vathalane's translator plate hummed for a moment. Around the chamber, delegates shifted. The Kaloon ambassador, Sayela, finally moved. She turned her head from the speaker panel and looked directly at me. Her expression was unreadable, which was normal for Kaloon, but there was something in the angle of her attention that felt, in the most cautious possible way, like hope. "You may explain," Vathalane said. I squared my shoulders. I thought of Oliver. I thought of his daughter asleep in a chair in a cold room, completely unaware that she was about to become, in a very strange and roundabout way, Earth's first ambassador to the galaxy. "Thank you," I said. "This is going to take a little while." The gallery had been cleared of staff when I began. That meant I was standing in front of 12 alien species, a translation matrix that was working very hard, and a silence so complete I could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. I started with Oliver. I told them what the file said, that his full name was Oliver Grant, that he was 34 years old when he made the recording, that he worked the night shift at a radio astronomy station, and that on the night in question, his daughter was 4 years old and had a name, Nora, that he had chosen because it meant light in a language his own mother had spoken, that he had held the microphone close to her face for about 90 seconds, that the recording had been made, as best as anyone could tell from the technical logs, entirely on impulse, that he had then broadcast it on an open frequency that was not monitored, not logged, not considered significant, because the station's actual work that night involved mapping hydrogen clouds, and this was something he did in a spare moment between data readings. That was all. There was no grand plan. There was no intended message. There was a tired man and a sleeping child and a vast and indifferent sky, and the man had done what human beings do when they are overwhelmed by something they love and have nowhere else to put it. He had shared it. Vathelane said nothing. The Merit delegate spheres were cycling through a soft amber light now, which I did not know the meaning of, and I made a mental note to look it up the moment I had access to my reference files. The Solon representative, a tall figure named Al, who had been the most senior Solon diplomat for what I understood was approximately 80 years, tilted their head at an angle I had come to recognize as a request to speak. I nodded at them even though I was not technically authorized to run the floor. "This Oliver Grant," Al said, through a translator that rendered their voice as something like a musical chord held at medium length. Was he aware that the signal would reach other star systems? "No," I said. "He didn't know anyone was listening." The chamber responded to this in ways I could not entirely read. The Merit amber deepened. The Vreth delegates exchanged pressure waves too fast for my device to catch. Sutella of the Kaloon made a very small sound that the translator rendered as nothing, which meant it was something the translation matrix had not encountered before. "Then why," Al said very carefully, "did he do it?" I took a breath. "Because he was alone," I said, "and he loved her, and humans, when they love something, tend to want the universe to know." The silence that followed that sentence was a different kind of silence from the one at the start. It was not the silence of shock or alarm. It was something more careful, something that reminded me, in a way I could not explain and did not try to, of the feeling you get standing at the edge of something very deep, looking down, trying to understand how far it goes. I pressed on. I told them about the other signals. That was when the room changed. The council had known about the breathing. They had not known about the rest. I had access to Earth's transmission archive, and I had spent the A-Tower transit to the council station reading through it with the focus of someone who knew they were going to need every word. Earth had been broadcasting into space for over 200 years, not secretly, not carefully, just continuously, the way we did everything, with noise and feeling and no particular plan. Music, thousands of songs in hundreds of languages, traveling outward right now at this moment at the speed of light, moving through star systems we had not yet visited and perhaps would never visit. Love songs and songs of grief and songs that were just rhythms people found beautiful. Conversations broadcast over radio waves that had leaked into space and were still drifting. The sound of crowds at celebrations. The sound of storms. Recordings made by researchers in forests and deserts and on the surface of the ocean. Children laughing and adults talking, and someone somewhere playing a stringed instrument alone in a room, getting one difficult passage right after many attempts, and the small sound of satisfaction they made when they finally got it. All of it moving outward, all of it unfiltered. I watched the council process this. It took a while. The Merit delegate who handled communications, a being I knew only by the identifier Alex-4, since Merit personal designations were not meant for external use, raised a limb. "You are saying that Earth has transmitted biological and cultural audio on open frequencies for over 2 centuries, unencrypted, unprompted, directed at no one in particular." "Yes," I said. "And your species was not aware that this was unusual." I thought about that for a moment. "We were aware that no one had answered," I said. "We didn't know if that was because no one was listening or because everyone was waiting for something. We kept transmitting because we didn't know what else to do. It felt better than silence." Alex-4 was still for a long time. "Then, your species experiences silence as uncomfortable." "Many of us, yes." Another long pause. "This explains a significant amount of your historical broadcast data." I almost smiled. "Probably." Vathelane called for a recess at that point, which I took as a positive sign. You do not recess when you are about to take an aggressive action. You recess when you need to think. I was walked to a small waiting room by a council attendant and given something warm to drink that tasted like very mild tea and probably wasn't. I sat with the drink in my hands and thought about Oliver Grant. I wondered if he had ever told anyone about the recording. I wondered if Nora had grown up knowing that her breathing was, at this exact moment, still traveling through space at 300,000 kilometers per second, passing through dark and cold and emptiness, outlasting every other thing about that particular night except the fact that it had happened at all. I wondered what the Kowloon ambassador had made of it. I thought about the sound she had made when I said that humans love things and want the universe to know. The translation matrix hadn't caught it. I thought that was probably the most important thing that had happened in that room. I finished the drink. I waited. The door to the waiting room opened, and the council attendant told me the recess was over. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I went back in. I am going to tell you the exact words I used, because I worked very hard on them and because I think they deserve to be in the record. I said, the signal that brought us here today was not a mistake. It was not a deliberate act. It was something between those two things, which is a space that human beings occupy more often than we probably should. A man was sitting in a quiet room with someone he loved, and the quiet room had a transmitter in it. And the person he loved was making the most ordinary sound in the world, and he thought, even if only for a second, that the sound was too good to keep. So he let it go. And it went further than either of us could have imagined. I paused. I looked around the room. I found Sayela's pale eyes and held them for a moment. I am not going to apologize for it, I said. I want to be very clear about that. I am not apologizing. I am explaining. There is a difference, and I think it matters. We did not break your rules out of disrespect. We broke them because we did not know they existed, and the reason we did not know they existed is that no one told us the galaxy was listening. If you had told us the galaxy was listening, we would have. I stopped. I thought about it honestly for a second. We probably would have transmitted more carefully, I said, and we would have lost something in the process. I am not sure that loss would have been worth the gain. The chamber was very quiet. Vathelane said, "You are defending the transmission." "I am defending the impulse behind it," I said. "The impulse is one of the best things about us. I would like you to understand it before you decide what to do with us." I reached into my files. I pulled up the archive I had prepared on the transit. I had sorted it by type. Music first, then voice recordings, then environmental sounds, then the signals that did not fit neatly into any category. The ones that were just feeling, expressed in sound, sent outward for no reason anyone had ever been able to fully explain. "With the Council's permission," I said, "I would like to show you what Earth sounds like when no one is watching." I pressed the first file. It was a woman singing to herself in a kitchen, unaware she was being recorded, her voice low and slightly off-key and absolutely certain of itself. I watched the room. The Marat spheres went a color I had never seen before. The Solon stood very still, the way birds stand still when they hear something coming. The Vreth exchanged pressure waves at a pace that suggested rapid, urgent conversation. And Sayela, ancient calm, unreadable Sayela, closed her eyes. She kept them closed for the full duration of the song. I made a note of that too. By the time I reached the 43rd recording in my archive, 2 of the Council's translation teams had requested copies of the files. By the 58th recording, Alex 4 of the Marat had asked me to pause so that they could confirm their equipment was functioning correctly, because they were receiving data from the audio that their instruments were not designed to categorize. "What is this element?" Alex 4 asked. "At the frequency range of," and here they cited a number I did not understand, "a very specific measurement. that does not correspond to informational content but appears in nearly every recording regardless of species or acoustic origin. I looked at my files. I looked at the recording that was currently paused, a group of humans somewhere warm, laughing together at something that had happened, the laughter overlapping and rising until it became something close to music. I think, I said carefully, that what you're measuring is warmth. LX4 was silent for a moment. Warmth is a thermal property. It is also something else, I said. We use the same word for both. There was a long pause. Then LX4 said, we do not have a word for the non-thermal version. I know, I said. I looked. The chamber was not silent anymore. It was full of sounds I could not translate, the press and hum of 12 species processing something they had not been prepared for. I stood at the speaker's platform and let it happen, because there is a kind of processing that you have to let run its course, and interrupting it is the worst thing you can do. I thought about what Vathelane had said at the start. 4,000 years. 4,000 years of careful, managed, precisely calibrated communication between civilizations. Every signal weighted and considered and filtered before it was released into the open. And then Earth. 200 years of shouting our feelings into the dark and hopping for an echo. I thought we might have been doing something the galaxy had forgotten how to do. I thought that might be the most dangerous thing about us. I thought it might also be the most valuable. Vathelane called for another recess, longer this time. I was escorted to a different waiting room, one with a view of space through a transparent panel, and I sat and watched the stars and thought about Oliver Grant sitting in his cold station watching the same stars 400 years ago, his daughter breathing softly in his chair, and I thought about how strange and improbable it was that this small, private, utterly human moment had traveled all this way and landed in the center of a 4,000-year-old institution and made it go quiet. I thought, good. I thought, that is exactly what we do. She found me in the corridor, outside the waiting room. I almost missed her. The Kaloon move quietly when they want to, and Sayela wanted to, and by the time I registered the sound of her footsteps, she was already close enough that I had to turn my whole body to face her. She was tall. Kaloon are always tall, but Sayela had a particular quality of tallness that felt less like physical height and more like depth, like there was more of her happening than was immediately visible. She wore the gray diplomatic sash of her office, and her hands, which were long and had one extra joint compared to human hands, were folded in front of her in what I had come to understand was the Kaloon gesture for private conversation. You have a moment, she asked. The translator rendered her voice as something deep and even like a cello string. It suited her. I have as many moments as you need, I said. She nodded. She walked toward the observation panel, and I fell into step beside her. We stood together for a moment looking at the stars, and I waited, because I had learned very early in diplomatic training that the Kaloon do not rush toward what they mean to say, and the worst thing you can do is reach for it before they get there. The breathing, she said finally. Yes. In the original signal, a pause, does it always sound like that? I thought about what she was really asking. You mean, does a sleeping child always breathe that way? I mean, does your species always sound like that when it is at rest? That particular quality, that rhythm, she paused again, that security. I felt something shift very quietly in my chest. Yes, I said, more or less. Sayela looked at the stars for a while. I let her. I want to tell you something that is not part of the official record, she said. And I want you to understand that I am telling you because I think you need to know it, not because I am making any kind of formal statement on behalf of my people. I understand, I said. When the signal reached our monitoring station, she stopped. She started again. The Kaloon have not slept in 3,214 years. We made a decision early in our development to move our consciousness into a continuous processing cycle. It was considered an advancement. It eliminated the inefficiency of unconsciousness. It allowed us to think and work and communicate without interruption, and we became, she paused. We became what we are. I did not say anything. I was listening in the way that you listen when you know something important is about to be said, and you don't want to disturb the air around it. When the signal reached our station, she continued, and the analysts decoded it and the audio was played, there was a response among my people that we did not anticipate. It spread very quickly through our communication networks. Everyone wanted to hear it. Everyone listened more than once. She stopped again. Her long hands tightened slightly against each other. There were Calhoun who listened to that recording hundreds of times, not for analysis, not to study the acoustic data, just to hear it. I waited. I was one of them, she said. She said it the way you say something that costs you something, quietly and without looking away from the stars. It made us feel something we did not have a name for anymore, she said. We had to search our historical archives to find the nearest equivalent, the closest word we have, and it is a very old word from a period of our language that most of my people cannot read anymore, translates, approximately, as the sensation of being held without hands. I did not speak for a long time. Safe, I said finally. She turned to look at me. Yes, that is the word. Something moved in her expression very subtly, like light shifting under water. We did not know we were still capable of it. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere far behind us in the council chamber, delegates were in recess, managing urgent messages, arguing perhaps, deciding perhaps. All of that felt very distant. This corridor, this observation panel, these two unlikely figures standing in front of the stars, this felt like where the real conversation was. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes. The sound you made, I said, in the chamber. When I said that humans love things and want the universe to know, the translator didn't catch it. Sayela was quiet for a moment. No, it would not. What was it? She looked back at the stars. It was a long time before she answered. It was, she said, the sound my people make when we recognize something we thought was gone. I pressed my hands together in front of me and looked at the stars and thought about Oliver Grant. I thought about him sitting in that cold room with a microphone and a sleeping child, and a feeling he had nowhere to put. I thought about how the universe had been waiting for someone to do exactly that, and had not known it was waiting, and when the signal arrived it did not know what to do with the feeling it produced. The same way, the galaxy had not known what to do with us. I am going to tell you something, I said to Sayela, also off the record. Yes, she said. When I walk back into that chamber and they decide what to do with Earth, I said, it is possible they are going to ask us to stop transmitting, to filter our signals, to be more careful about what we send into open space, and I am going to fight that with everything I have, not because the rules are wrong. The rules exist for reasons, but because I stopped. I found the words. Because I think the galaxy needed to hear that sound. I think it needed to know that somewhere, in some cold room, a person had something they loved enough to share with the dark. And I think it is going to keep needing that. And I think we are the only ones left who know how to give it. Sayela looked at me for a long time. Then she said, I know. Then she said, I will be speaking in the chamber when we reconvene. She did not tell me what she was going to say. She didn't need to. We stood together for another minute, watching the light from 1,000 stars cross the space between us and the glass. And then the recess timer chimed in the wall, and we walked back in. I am writing this in my personal log on the return transit, and I am aware that the official report I filed before boarding this shuttle was approximately 14 pages long and contained none of what I am about to write here. The official report covers the Council's decision, the formal resolution, the language agreed upon after 3 hours of additional session following the final recess. It covers the procedural steps and the diplomatic framing and the timeline for follow-up review. It is an accurate document and a thorough one, and it says everything the diplomatic corps needs to hear. This is everything else. When we reconvened after the second recess, Vathelane read a statement from the Council's legal body. It said that Earth's transmissions had been reviewed and classified under the provision of unintentional broadcast, which meant that no formal sanction would be applied. It noted that Earth should, going forward, register all open-frequency transmissions with the Council's Signal Bureau. It was careful and measured, and said nothing about what any of us were actually thinking. Then Sayela spoke. She stood at the speaker's platform and she was very still, the way the Kalun are still, and she said the following words in her own language and let the translation matrix carry them across the chamber. She said, "The signal from Earth reached my people and reminded us of something we believed we had released." She said, "The releasing of something is not the same as its absence." She said, "We would like to request that Earth continue transmitting all signals on all open frequencies, unfiltered." She said, "We believe this is important." And then she sat down. There was a discussion. There was a long discussion. The Vreth expressed concern about protocol. The Merit requested clarification on several points. One of the smaller delegation species whose name I cannot transliterate asked whether the emotional impact of human transmissions could be considered a form of non-consensual influence, to which Sayela responded, in a very measured tone, that the Kalun had not experienced non-consensual influence and had found the experience entirely worthwhile. In the end, the Council passed a secondary resolution. It was unusual. It had no precedent. It used a word that, as I later confirmed in the archive, had never appeared in a Council resolution before. The word was unfiltered. The resolution requested that Earth continue broadcasting on open frequencies, unfiltered, in the interest of what the resolution called galactic cultural continuity. It was, functionally, the galactic community asking us to keep talking, to keep singing, to keep recording the ordinary sounds of our ordinary lives and sending them into the dark without worrying too much about who was listening. I called my director from the shuttle. He asked what concessions I had made. I said none. He asked what promises I had made. I said a lullaby weekly on the same frequency. He was quiet for a while. Then he said which one. I told him we would take requests. There is a section at the bottom of my personal log where I keep notes that are not for any official record. Things I want to remember exactly as they were. Small moments that official reports tend to sand down into something smooth and safe and slightly less true than what actually happened. I am going to write one more thing there. Before I boarded the shuttle, Sayela met me at the departure port. She handed me a small data file. She said it was a collection of Kalun compositions from the period before their continuous processing cycle began, music and voice recordings from a time when her people still slept. She said they were from the archive that almost no living Kalun could access anymore, because the language had shifted so far that the materials required specialized translation. She said she had arranged for the translation. She said she would like humans to play these recordings on an open frequency, so that the Kalun could hear what they sounded like coming from somewhere else. I took the file. I said I would make sure it happened. She said, "Thank you." Then she said, "The sound of your species sleeping has reached 14 of our systems. Some of our people have begun, voluntarily, introducing short periods of reduced consciousness into their cycles. Not full sleep, something adjacent. They say the data from these periods is difficult to categorize." I said, "What do they call it?" She looked at me. "They are calling it resting," she said. "They do not have another word for it yet. They are working on one." I am on the shuttle now. The stars outside my window are the same stars they have always been. In 14 directions from where I am sitting, human signals are moving through those stars, and they carry with them the sound of music and laughter and argument and love. And somewhere in that archive, moving at the speed of light toward a future none of us will live to see. There is a 90-second recording of a small child named Nora breathing in her sleep while her father listened, and the universe listened, and nobody knew they were all in the same moment together. I think about Oliver Grant a lot. I wonder if he is still alive. He would be very old if he were. I wonder if anyone has told him what he started. I asked the research division to find out before I left, and they said they would check. I hope he knows. I hope Nora knows. I hope when they hear what happened, when they hear that a child's breathing crossed 400 light years and sat down in front of the oldest deliberative body in the known galaxy, and made it go quiet and then made it ask for more, I hope they feel what that is. I know what it is. I have been a diplomat for 11 years and I have worked very hard at being precise with language, and I know that in formal settings you choose words carefully and you do not overstate things. But this is my personal log, and no one else is going to read it except me and maybe, someday, whoever is doing the archive review. So I will say it plainly. What Oliver did, sitting alone in a cold room with a microphone and a sleeping child, and a feeling he could not hold anymore. It was the most human thing I have ever encountered in 11 years of living between worlds. It was the most human thing, and it turned out the galaxy needed exactly that. I think we're going to be all right up here. I think we always were. I pressed play on the first Kowloon recording. It was slow and very old, and the language was one I did not speak. But the voice in it was warm, and the melody moved the way all melodies do when they are made by someone who is feeling something true. I recorded myself listening to it. I sent it on an open frequency before I thought too hard about it. Old habits. The shuttle moved through the dark and I sat with my headphones on and the stars went past, and somewhere in all of that space, traveling outward forever, the sound of a little girl named Nora kept going and going and going, and it would never stop, and I thought that was the right way for a thing like that to end. Not with silence. Never with silence. Just the sound of someone breathing, and the dark and everything listening.